Welcome to the tutorial on iColor ProRIP Essentials. This new program from UNINET is a ground-up rebuild of a RIP software, and it focuses on providing you with all of the functionality that you need to run your white toner transfer printer without any of the added complications that can cause damage to your printer or destroy your print quality. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to cover how to import a graphic and get a transfer out the other side, but we're also going to walk through all of the individual settings and features that are included in ProRIP Essentials so that you can be confident you're getting the most out of your machine. To follow along, you'll need to have ProRIP Essentials installed, and you're going to need to validate that before launching. The installation is fairly standard, and the user manual has some great tips if you get stuck along the way, but I'm going to walk you through the validation process because there's a couple areas where it's easier to get hung up. The first time you launch ProRIP Essentials, it's going to pop up a window here asking you to validate your software. So you want to click Validate Software.
What's going to pop up is a software activation and validation window. Now, here you're going to use your activation code provided whenever you purchased your printer and plug that into the UNINET validation website. That's going to, when combined with your system ID, produce a validation code that you can insert here. Now, you can use the program in demo mode just to get started if you don't have your activation code, but all of your transfers are going to be produced with a watermark on them. So this is an important step to getting up and running. All right, so the first place you're going to paste your code is right here. And then go to the UNINET iColor validation site. You can type in the code, system ID, and click Get Validation Code. And this is where we can grab this right here.
You can then use that validation code to activate your copy of ProRIP Essentials. At that point, ProRIP Essentials should pop up for the first time, and you can follow along with the rest of this tutorial. Once your program's installed and ready to go, you should have a window just like this. To get started, we're going to click this Import Graphic button right here, and that's going to pull up this menu. Now, obviously, you can navigate anywhere under your system and pull your own graphics if you have them, but you don't need one to follow along because iColor ProRIP Essentials includes this sample files folder full of print-ready graphics that you can use. Let's go ahead and pick the Carnival iColor letter design. That's one that I'm familiar with for several years. It has a lot of really bright colors and great shapes to work with, and you'll see as soon as it pops up that it's mirrored, and that's because the toner configuration is set to overprint. That means the white is the front cartridge, and that's the last color to print as the transfer is making its way through the system. That allows us to produce two-step transfers for t-shirts, hard surface one-step transfers. All of the traditional types of printing you're going to do for apparel are going to be white overprint. Now, if you click this drop-down box, you can see CMYK, and if I select that, it's going to flip our graphic to be right reading. This is how it would look on a normal piece of paper, and this is the setting you're going to use if you want to produce letterhead or invitations or thank you greeting cards, things like that. You can also do the white underprint mode, and in a mode like this, it's still going to be right reading, but that allows you to select things like aqua clear, which is a water slide type material, clear window cling, where you're going to be printing on the front of the graphic and then sticking it to the outside of a window where people are going to read it. That's where underprint comes into play because it'll put white underneath your graphic so the full color side is visible from the front. But again, for the majority of our prints, we're going to be using the overprint configuration where the white gets laid down on top of our graphic and it's going to be mirrored. That's a very fast rundown of the overprint, underprint, and CMYK settings. One thing to remember though is whenever you change this configuration, you will have to move your cartridge configuration around. So for CMYK, you're going to replace the white cartridge with your black cartridge. For underprint, the white moves to the back of the machine. It's the first thing to print, and you put a cyan cartridge in the front. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you're messing with these settings here. And the only time you're going to do that is when you're using a specific paper that's going to correlate with that new setting. Okay, right now everything is set at default. I have the iColor 560 printer installed, and the print mode is set to two-step standard. Now that's the iColor two-step standard media. It's bright, it's vibrant, that allows the whites to really pop, and it's very durable. Now, if you're using a different type of media, let's say iColor two-step select, you want to make sure that's chosen instead. As soon as you change the media type, ProRIP Essentials does everything that needs to happen on the back end to change the color profiles, the amount of toner, the fuser settings, everything, so that as soon as you click print, it knows how to communicate with the printer and get a great result every single time. Now, for most use cases, apart from that setting, the only other setting you may touch on a regular basis is the size of the media. You want to make sure that if you're running A4 media, that you don't have letter selected. Even though they're very similarly sized, they're a little bit shorter, a little bit wider, and if you've got the wrong version selected, it can cause paper jams and all kinds of issues. Now, the resolution. In most cases, you won't want to mess with the resolution. I do have a customer that prints transfers for matchboxes, and he uses a different queue altogether together. He's using the underprint queue with aqua clear media, and in his case, he selects that 600 by 600 DPI setting because he wants to really get the best quality out of the fine details and small little logos that he puts on there. But for most t-shirt designs, 300 by 300 is perfect. Same thing with the bypass tray. If you have a media that requires a different tray, it should automatically highlight that tray for you. Otherwise, if it says bypass, just go ahead and use the bypass. The same thing goes with paper type. If you're in a situation where you're changing your media settings, so for instance, let's go from overprint to CMYK, and we've got plain paper highlight here. ProRIP Essentials comes baked in with all of the settings you need for the media type. So it knows to adjust the fuser temperature down to plain to 74 grams. So you don't have to change these settings on your own the majority of the time. ProRIP Essentials already has all of this functionality built into the software. So as soon as you change the paper type, if there needs to be an adjustment to the fuser temperature, it happens automatically. So for all intents and purposes, whenever you're running ProRIP Essentials, the vast majority of the time, the only thing you'll have to confirm is that you're in the right toner configuration and that you have the right media and size of media selected. Everything else should be okay on its own.
Okay, so the next thing I want to focus on is the toner reduction or rasterization feature, and that's going to be this button right here. It's all in one spot now. So when we click this, it's going to pull up a menu that says Point and Click Rasterization, and you can see the master image right here, or we can click Display Preview, and that's going to give us a closer look at whatever we've done when we've enabled rasterization. So rasterization is turned on right now, but we don't have any color selections applied to our image. So let's go back over here to Display Master, and I'm going to click Add Color or Area to Rasterize. Now, if I click this, there's 4 options inside here, and I'll just explain what these do as quickly as possible. The first one is Entire Graphic, All Colors. So whenever I enable this, that means the entire graphic is going to have a layer of toner reduction applied to it. So if a client ever presents you with an image that's, let's say, a solid photograph, and there's no specific areas you can target to remove that are similar to the shirt color, one way to attack that is to just apply rasterization to the entire image and remove a small portion of it. Before we select this though, I want to go ahead and make some adjustments. We have the option to choose either round holes, lines that are going to go diagonally through the entire image at a certain angle, squares, diamonds, or ellipses. Now in this case, lines can actually look great, but right now we have size 19 selected, which is going to be huge holes. It's going to be just gigantic 1/4 inch rips through the entire page, not something that's going to look good, and it would very much detract from the image we have. So let's bring this down here to like size 2 or 3 holes, and then let's go ahead and select entire graphic, all colors. That means every single individual color, irrespective, is just going to be removed, lines across the entire image. Let's click continue. I'm going to go ahead and update the full resolution preview. Okay, now that it's loaded, we can click display preview right here. And now that we're zoomed in, you can see that the lines going through the image are very, very small. Now, it may look like they're jagged, but they're actually going to be very smooth going through the image. Now, something like this is going to make the image more breathable, more washable. It's only going to minimally show from any kind of distance at all. You know, from a couple feet away, nobody's going to be able to see these lines very easily. But it allows you to take a large, unbroken image, something that would normally not be feasible on a white toner transfer printer, and it allows you to run virtually any artwork that somebody brings to you. Now, what if we were to go ahead and click this and remove it? This is going to get rid of it for the entire image. We're going to update the preview again. And let's go ahead and switch from lines to round. And I could even make this size 4. Now, one of the things you'll see is those lines, depending on how small they get, there is a lower limit to how small you can make things. If it was just size 3 lines and you notice that there's just little bits of white that are sticking in between where the lines aren't getting removed properly, at that point, you could either adjust the white choke. This is how far under the color that the white no longer lays down, or you may want to increase the size of the area removed. That way it's easier when you're doing the A to B step. But for now, let's go ahead and try round shaped holes, size 4, 45-degree angle, and we're going to go back to the display master, add color or area to rasterize, click the entire graphic one more time, and then click continue. Now we're going to update this, and I'll show you what the round sized removal looks like. All right, now we're going to go ahead and go to display preview. And you can see here's what it's going to look like with the round holes removed. Again, these are still very small holes that are removed, but if you notice that when you're doing the A to B step that you're leaving, little white dots in here, either your A to B settings aren't exactly right, or you've just chosen holes that are too small or too fine for your current skill level to pull apart. Either way, this will vary, and you can experiment with it until you get the right look for the image that you're working with. Okay, so let's go ahead and click this removal and get rid of it, and then we're going to try a different setting. Okay, next let's go back to Display Master, and then we're going to look at the next thing here. Entire graphic, selected color only. Now there are 2 variations of this. Entire graphic, selected color only, or selected area only. Now, what this means is if I were to click this dark cyan, for instance, that is going to select every instance of this dark cyan, and we're going to apply this type of transparency to it. On the other hand, if I do selected area only, I can select this dark cyan right here and apply this transparency to it. And then I could, in theory, change these settings around and select a different version of cyan and remove it, but it won't impact any of the other areas. So let me just show you right now. Entire graphic, selected color only, click continue. When selecting a color, I have two options. I can either use a color picker, which is going to be a color window like this, and I can type in a hex code, or I can pick any color here that I'm aware of from inside the graphic. But in most cases, you're not going to know the specific color of anything you're trying to remove. So usually the easiest way to go about this is to pick a color from the graphic. Let's switch over to that. So I'm going to go click Add Color to Rasterize, Entire Graphic, Selected Color Only. And then we're just going to go ahead and pick color from graphic. Now, here's what I mean when I say it's going to pick all of the dark cyan out. Let's go ahead and click it here. Update full resolution preview. Now, do you see how everything has turned this shade of gray? That means that it's been impacted by our color selection and transparency. This master display is now showing us that there's some impacted colors. If I were to hide selections for 2 seconds, it would show us what the original graphic looked like. That, and it's going to go back away here. And now let's go to display preview. This is going to show us exactly what that transparency looks like now. Now, if you take a look here, every single version of that dark cyan is impacted by this color removal that we've gone ahead and done. Every area, even areas that we might not have noticed beforehand, we can see they're impacted. Now, if we did not want to impact every single version of this color, another way to go about that is to click this, move it. Now, before we cancel this, let me go ahead and show you this. Do you see this right here, the tolerance? I've gone ahead and I have this selected. Now, right here, well, I've got that selected. If I increase the tolerance, for instance, we may be able to get it to impact this lighter cyan. So let's go ahead and go to 75 tolerance. Let's just see if that happens. Let's just see if it takes it out. Okay, now that I've upped the tolerance, which this is an extreme case of this, what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've taken not only that dark cyan, but anything that's within a very broad range of that color. So now I've not only impacted the dark cyan, but I've started to get the tonal shades of it. What's interesting is we're seeing it across the entire mask, all of the light and dark areas of the balloons, but this different blue, which it's more of a dark blue, this wasn't impacted. So it's really only affecting things that are still in that cyan range, even with such a huge tolerance level. What this allows us to do is on photographs or areas where we don't have complete control over the color like we do in a vector image like this, we can make a selection part of the graphic that we know we want to remove. But if it was something like a skin tone or something where there's some variance and gradients, we can crank up that tolerance level by saying, here's the color that we want removed, that we know we want removed. And we want to get things that are in a pretty broad range around it. And that's going to open up the ability to not have just really weird patchy spots that are removed, but instead get an entire area. And then you can add to it with other removals if it's not quite getting everything. Okay, so now let's go ahead and remove this. We're going to update the preview again, and we're going to take a look at yet another version. Let's go back to display master. And now here's the entire graphic again. All of our wonderful dark cyans and medium cyans are back. And we're going to click add color to rasterize. Now here is the other side of the coin. We're going to do selected area only. Continue. We have the same color picking options. We can either use the color picker or pick the color from the graphic. Now let's do the same dark cyan, but in this case, we're only going to remove the dark cyan from this balloon and only what's touching our color picker. That, update the full resolution preview, and now you can immediately notice before we've even seen the preview, this area is gray and none of the other medium or dark cyan areas have even been affected at all. So now I can go to display preview and I can see just this balloon and a couple of little pieces of confetti that were attached to the graphic. Only that is removed, but as soon as I go over here, nothing removed. This is great if you have an image where there's just one large unbroken area that's a couple inches wide. You know it's potentially going to be a problem down the road for your customer's shirt, so you go ahead and selectively remove certain areas that can enable stretchability and washability over the long term. Okay, let's go ahead and remove that. Now, the last way to rasterize is not something that's going to show up on this one. In fact, if I were to use transparency for the entire graphic and click continue, nothing is going to show here because we're using a vector graphic that's either printing something or it's not printing something. That means every single one of these objects is completely solid and the areas that aren't printing are completely negative space. This is the ideal type of graphic to work with here, where you either have solid shapes and graphics or you just have dead space. But sometimes you're going to get graphics from customers that you don't have control over. So let me go ahead and show you an example of what that would look like. I've gone ahead and I've pulled up the preview for this. Now this is a partially transparent image. The word UNINET is completely solid. This is pure toner here. But behind it, this oval has varying amounts of transparency. It's going to be either more or less solid. So on something like Photoshop, you could easily put something behind it and you would be able to see it partially from behind this. But whenever we're trying to produce transfers, we don't have the luxury of just laying down less toner to create transparency. In order to properly make an A to B transfer, there either has to be solid toner or no toner. So the best way around that is this halftone rasterization, where we create transparency by using dots of toner, either dots, lines, ellipses, what have you, of toner. So in this case, let's go ahead and use larger holes as an example. I'm just going to go to size 10 holes. This is going to make it much easier to see on the preview. I'm going to go round size 10 holes. And also let me show you what it looks like if we just change the angle. 45-degree angle is going to be just diagonal like that. 22.5 is going to be more vertical like this. So size 10 holes, 22.5-degree angle, and this way we're going to use the transparency. We're going to let this transparency map here determine how much rasterization is taking place. It's going to affect the entire graphic, but we're not choosing it based on color. We're now choosing it based on the transparency, and we're going to let those holes simulate this transparency roll off for us. Let's go ahead and click continue. It's going to preview, and now I'm going to click display preview. And let's zoom around here. So right here, you can see the solid E from UNINET. It has not been affected by this transparency reduction because it's a completely solid object, solid text. There's nothing to remove there. If you were looking at the image, it would show 100% opacity. But over here, you can see we have the gray and we have the different gradient colors that are going to be affected. And here's where we can really see the story unfold. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to see, but right here, you can see that there's little punches of transparency. These black dots are areas where no toner would be laid down. We have this otherwise solid gray and the little dots of toner that are removed. But as we move farther out, you'll see that the holes get a little bit bigger, and then no longer is it just holes punched out of a solid work, but it's more like a checkerboard pattern. And then as we move farther out, instead of it being a checkerboard pattern, we have dots of toner. And then as we roll off towards the end, the dots of toner get smaller and smaller until over here we may or may not be able to hold on to that detail during an A to B step. Now, due to the nature of the white toner transfer process, simulating halftones like this, simulating transparency roll-off, is not an ideal situation. You're going to have difficulty holding on to pretty much any dots that are smaller than 15, 20, 25% of the maximum size. These very small dots, very hard to hold on to. And then on the flip side, you're going to have trouble holding on to anything that's 80% opacity or higher. Areas where we have very small dots of removal because the toner is almost solid, that's going to lend itself to having little white dots of filled in toner where they don't want to peel properly. So halftones are something that you can utilize, but you really do need to prepare your graphics properly for them. In this graphic, it looks like they cap out at no more than 65, 70% opacity, and then they do roll off all the way. But this wouldn't really be missed all that much whenever you're A to Bing it would just come off. But in a pinch, when a customer provides you with a graphic that has smoke or something like that that you want to reproduce, you can do it using this option.
Okay, the next feature I want to talk about is the special effects feature. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and right click on the artwork, and here below split image using Smart Cut, I'm going to go ahead and click special effects. Now that's going to pull up this menu here where it says available effects, none, or distress. Let's click distress, and it's going to show us kind of an example of what it would look like with some distressing on there. But we can click settings, and that's going to pull up this menu right here. Under this menu, you can pick between several different types of patterns. There's pattern 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these are all very different types of patterns, but underneath these there's different styles, and it tends to be the size of the pattern, the orientation, and things like that. And you can actually work it all the way up. You see once we get to 6, 7, 8, the scale just gets larger and larger. So we're going to leave pattern 1, pattern style 8, and let's go ahead and apply that now. Click OK and exit. And it took very little time, but now you can see that we've applied this distressing pattern over our image, and it's pretty uniform. Sometimes you just want that extra bit of breaking up without introducing the full toner reduction here, and this does a pretty good job of just adding that little bit of grunge to it. So if you ever want to have some kind of pattern or distressing that you add to your images and you want it in one place, that's a great little menu to go to for it without having to resort to a real uniform toner reduction or rasterization setting. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the color replacement feature. If you move over here to color and toner, what used to be a setting over here in this toner reduction print setting tab has now been moved to its own area. So what we can do here is click color replace and remove. And in the same way that we can reduce toner coverage like we did for the medium cyan right here, we can actually come over here now and click add color to remove or replace. So let's go ahead and click that. And then just like we have the color picker, which is, the wheel or the hex values we can type in, we can also pick the color from the graphic. Let's go ahead and do that now. It's going to bring up the eyedropper. Now, instead of coming over here, we're going to do it right in this menu. So let's go ahead and click this medium cyan again. Click that. That's going to be R0, G130, B142. Okay. Now here is where the color picker may come into play. If you were to pick a color from a graphic, we would replace this color with literally one of the other colors that we choose. But if we use the color picker now, instead of that color, I want to type in, let's do a medium orange. Click OK. And you can see this has affected every instance of that medium cyan. They're all now turning over to that orange. In addition to this, we also have a tolerance meter again. So you can see that we have just kind of the fringes that are still not converted over, and this area right here where the lighter cyanish looking color still hasn't been changed. If we raise this tolerance level, you can see at some point now we've converted it over. What I think is most interesting is whenever I increase the tolerance of this color that I wanted to change, it didn't replace all the dark cyan and medium cyan with the same color and flatten it out. It created a tonal variation of this color that I replaced it with. So as I increased the tolerance, it intelligently made the modification so that it knew that this was lighter, and even these other colors that were falling within the tolerance, the darker ones stayed darker, the lighter replaced colors stayed lighter. In past versions of this color replacement, whenever you replaced a color with another, it would flatten it out completely. So this is a really welcome addition to it, intelligently doing exactly what we want with a color replacement. I don't want to flatten it out and just wash the image out. I really want it to have multiple layers if they're there. So that's a wonderful addition.
Let's jump over to the artwork tab. This is all the position settings for your graphic. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's say you bring your graphic in and it's kind of up and over to the corner like that. You can click center horizontally, and now it's going to bring it right dead center on the page. That means you've got the same amount of space on this side that you do on this side. You can also center it vertically by clicking this, and now it's going to be dead centered from top to bottom. But what if you want to rotate that graphic 90 degrees? Notice what it just did. It just resized that graphic slightly. It went from 60% down to 50% to make sure that we've got enough space on the top and bottom. But if you feel like it made the graphic too small, you can build a platen with it, and it's going to resize the graphic up to the maximum dimension that it can. Look at that. Now in this case, it left us just a little bit of space between the sides of the graphic. We're probably looking at about 1/8 of an inch, but 1/4 inch total. That's going to be cutting it close for some graphics. I typically like to have 1/4 inch on both sides, but if you've got a graphic and you want to push it to the max, you could potentially push it to that 1/8 mark. Now the other thing is you can flip a graphic vertically. Now make sure that there's no text involved when you're doing that, because you could accidentally unmirror your graphic and not notice it. The other thing is, since it's on its side, when we click flip vertically, we're actually flipping it horizontally because it's rotated. So you can rotate through the size of the graphic. See, it's resizing it and making sure there's safe margins on all sides. The other thing is you could rotate it a specific amount. So instead of 90 degrees, you could rotate it 45 degrees. These are all very specific functions. The reason you might want to do this is if you had a round graphic with a little surfboard, well, maybe you could just put it in there like that. Now, notice how there's a lot of blank space here that just got introduced by us rotating it. If you were to press this button right here, you can remove that blank space, and it's going to trim all of the transparent pixels, which is going to give us more control over where we put this. Let's click that here. There we go. See, even though we rotated it, we've actually trimmed all of those extra pixels. So now I can push this graphic right up to the edge, and we're not wasting any space in terms of where I can put it. Now, most of these settings, they're very straightforward. Now, constraining proportions, that's something you should leave on, because if you turn constrained proportions off, then you could end up deforming your graphic. And if you turn it back on, it's now locked to that incorrect aspect ratio. And unfortunately for this version of ProRIP, there's no way to set the horizontal and vertical scale separately. It's just one unified setting. So if you were to turn this setting off and adjust your image incorrectly, the best way to get around that is to delete it and start over. All right, so the next thing we want to talk about is setting up a gang sheet. So let's say you have artwork and you want to make it the size of a left chest print. Let's go ahead and take this scale down to something a little more reasonable for that, 30%. And now you see we have a 2.5 inch by 3.3 inch tall graphic. And we can just set it right here. And then when we right click it, we're going to get the menu here, and we have the option to create a gang sheet. So let's go ahead and click that button now. There's another setting menu that's going to pop up, create gang sheet. And you can pick how much horizontal and vertical separation or padding you're going to put around the graphic. Now, this is a little bit misleading, because if I select 1/2 inch horizontal and vertical, it's going to give me a 1/2 inch padding on this image. And then the next copy that it creates, it will add another 1/2 inch around that one. So typically you only need around 1/4 inch between graphics. I mean, that won't leave you a whole lot of room for scissors, but that's enough to get adhesion onto whatever surface you're putting it on. So if we just set 1/4 inch on both sides, that's still going to give us a 1/2 inch all the way around, which means a dedicated 1/4 inch for each of our images. Now, whenever I click OK, it's going to run a script that's going to create duplicate copies and fill our entire sheet as much as possible. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the most efficient use of space. That's still going to take a little bit of planning. If you have 8 inches of usable space and you're using 2.1 inches of graphic, well, then you're going to end up with some loose space over here, as opposed to if it was 2 inches and you could get 4 perfect images across the board. So let's go ahead and try this out and see what happens. Now, initially, it sometimes creates a duplicate right in here, but it's actually setting it up there and then moving it to where it finds space. So by the time it finishes, everything should have its own little location without any overlap. But here's a great example of negative space. Because the image here is 2.5 inches wide, 2.55 inches wide, we don't have enough room for both the padding and another image. So pretty much everything after the 5.5 inch mark is wasted. Now, let's try something a little different. Let's go ahead and manually plan this out. We're going to go ahead and remove these graphics, and let's try rotating this image a little bit. We're going to go clockwise 90 degrees, and then I'm hoping here that if we can set it up, we can have 2 images side by side. So let's just see what happens if we clone the graphic. Go to a 1/4 inch. Now, before we had 6 images, my hope is we can get at least 8. And there we go. So now we have a much better use of space. Same location. Imagine if this was a horizontally oriented graphic where you had text going this way. We'd be able to fit 8 images in the same area that we were only able to fit 6 images just by planning our artwork a little bit better. So keep that in mind when you're creating a gang sheet, that this function will do exactly what you tell it to, but it's not going to plan the most efficient use of space. You'll have to do that on your own. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is how to use Smart Cut. So first of all, let's go ahead and grab a new graphic, and we're going to take a look at, let's do the marlin. That's a large fish right here. It's a great image. Okay, what Smart Cut allows us to do is take an image that may be larger than any one of our transfers. So on the iColor 560, you're going to be using a lot of A4, which is 8.25 by 11 and some change. But oftentimes our clients want to see images that are 11, 12, 13 inches wide and 11, 12, 13 inches tall. That's something that we just can't fit on a single sheet of transfer paper. That's where Smart Cut comes in. It allows us to take an image, blow it up to much larger proportions, and then separate it into multiple transfers. And what it'll do is it will cut along seams where people's eyes aren't naturally going to be attracted to. Instead of just being a sharp horizontal line, it's going to follow the contours of the artwork. That way, when you put them back together, people aren't going to see where the 2 images were put together. It gives you a little bit more leeway in terms of doing your transfers. Even if it slips just a 1/16 of an inch, people probably aren't even going to notice. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. And down here at the bottom, you see the split image using Smart Cut option. That's going to launch a totally separate instance of Smart Cut, which is fully featured, separate program. Let's click that now. Okay, so now that Smart Cut is loaded, let's go ahead and maximize this image. All right, so the first thing I want to do is point out the width and the height. This image at 200 pixels per inch is actually an 11 by 10 inch image. That's larger than our 8.5 by 11 or 8.25 by 11.6 inch transfer can handle. So let's go ahead and just take this image at full resolution and split it apart. So to do that, come on over here to this menu that says Mask and Split. Let's go ahead and click Split. Now you'll see the first and the second. You've got a pink and a blue. This is going to be the first transfer sheet and the second transfer sheet. So we're going to want to create a boundary box for the first one and the second one, and there needs to be some overlap here. So let's go ahead and bring this in. Let's maximize it, and I'll show you what we're talking about. Under the little gear icon here, if we click that, it's going to allow us to choose different dimensions. So you have A4 legal, A4. Let's just go ahead and pick A4 as our main transfer. That's going to be transfer 1. We can just leave it on auto center. Okay, now you see the left-hand side here. It has a little pink outline showing how much of this image is going to be covered by the first transfer. Now, don't worry too much about that yet, because we're going to move these around once we get our second transfer on the board. Let's go ahead and click the gear again, and we can use another A4 transfer. Now we have 2 transfers. Now look at what's happening here. The blue transfer has a lot of blank space, so does the purple transfer. Now we're shifting it so that this is the area of overlap. This is the area that Smart Cut has to work with in order to pick a spot to cut this image. Now, we don't have to leave this image vertically oriented. This area of overlap here is a little awkward, right? You've got the flow of the fish that kind of goes along this diagonal horizontal, but only this area here is what we're picking to split it apart on. In fact, it's kind of the highest activity area of the image. You've got all these waves and all of this fish. Maybe we should rotate this image 90 degrees and let it split along a more natural path, at least a less noticeable one. Let's go ahead and click that now. Now what happened here is it took our sheets with it. So if we want to rotate the orientation of our transfer sheets, let's come over here to the gear again, and we can click delete to get rid of one of our sheets, and then click OK. Now we've removed our first pink sheet, and we can do the same thing again with the blue sheet. We're going to click delete and click OK. And now we're essentially starting back over with our split, because we noticed there was a little bit of an issue with how we were trying to split it apart. So let's go ahead and do it again. Let's click the gear icon. We're going to go ahead and go with an A4 sized image. Click OK. Notice that it's a vertical again. So let's go ahead and drag this over so that we have just the top of the fin and now plenty of room to work with the image. Click the second one. I'm going to do A4 again, and we can bring this way over. So now we have a lot of room for Smart Cut to figure out where it wants to produce this split at. Now, there are two options here, photograph and graphics. If you choose photograph, it's going to assume that the majority of the image is going to look kind of like this wave. There's no sharp lines or edges for it to contour along, so it's going to get a little bit more creative. If we split it as a graphic, it's going to look for more sharp vector lines to follow along with. Let's try graphics as our smart split. And the next thing we want to pick is what color of garment that we're going to be putting it on. In this case, let's just assume that we're going to be putting it on a black shirt. That means it's going to be more biased towards picking areas where you won't notice the line as much in the dark areas. Now, this happened very quickly, but we have the first image right here, and it's cut right along the fin. Isn't that interesting? It cut it right along the fin, where if there's a little bit of separation, it's just going to look like a thicker shadow against a black shirt. So we have that one. Okay, now we can click save over here in the bottom right. And what's going to happen is it's going to close out of Smart Cut and send both of the images that we just created back over to ProRIP. So the results will be sent for printing. The application will close on success. Proceed. Yes. Now back in ProRIP, it's going to say, is it okay to load graphic 1? Now let's go ahead and click OK here. And the first image loaded, you can see that we have the majority of the marlin and a little bit of this leftover fin right there. And it's essentially ripping that first image right there. As soon as it's done ripping that first image, now we have it up there, we can click OK to load graphic 2. Now this is what's going to be put on our second transfer. We'll click OK here. Now you can see our second transfer has a lot more of its space used, but we're able to fit an image that was larger than the dimensions of any one transfer sheet. So now that's just with an 11-inch graphic. What if we were to take this marlin, the same marlin, and try to blow it up even larger? Let's just take a look at that real quick. So let's go ahead and open the marlin back up. We can see that it's a pretty large square, but we can actually get a little bit more creative with how big we make this image. So let's go ahead and do this again. Let's split it using Smart Cut, and let's take it in here. So right now we have an 11-inch by 10-inch image. The key here is the resolution. We're actually at 200 pixels per inch, which is a pretty good print resolution. Anything over 150 is going to be acceptable. So let's just go ahead and see how large we can get it while still being over 150 pixels per inch. Let's go ahead and go up to 15 inches. Okay, well, that's about right. 150, 148.6 pixels per inch. It's going to be pretty close. It will start to degrade if you get it too much larger than that, but from a foot or two away, this is still going to look like a decent graph. Now, the question is, can we actually fit this onto sheets of transfer paper? I'm not sure. Let's take a look at it. So let's go ahead and rotate this over like this, and let's click on split. I'm going to go ahead and do the gear here, and we're going to pick the same A4 size transfer for our first one, and it's going to put it right over here. Now, look at this. Already I can see a little bit of a problem. The image is not going to fit on a single sheet of transfer paper right there because we have the nose is just too long, even for the long side of our image. So let's go ahead and bring it down a little bit. Let's go ahead and say 12.5 inches because we have this area here that we can kind of bring down a little bit. Does that do it for us? Yes. Okay. So now that we're down to 12.5 inches, the resolution is obviously going to get better because we've shrunk it down a little bit. But now we've focused the marlin in this area here. So we have the first part of the image. See how it sweeps over to the left. So we're kind of wasting that space. Well, now we've blown that up so that a single transfer is going to cover that area. Now we can go ahead and set our second transfer, A4 size. Now we've got our second transfer, and that's going to cover this area of the image here with the splash, with the bottom of the tail. So we can actually bring this over and say all of this area here is now viable for overlap. It doesn't have to be perfectly horizontal. We can actually stagger it a little bit. Now this time, let's go ahead and just split it as photo to see what it does a little differently this time. So we're going to click Smart Split right here, and it is still going on a dark garment, but here the split's going to be a little bit more interesting because we're not actually allowing it to start the split down here. In fact, I want to talk about that real quick. This image, you can see where we're allowing it to split. We can't really move the pink box up anymore because we are limited by the top of the fin and the pointed tip of his nose and the tip of his snout. This is going to be how far over we can get and how far down we can get. So this is it right here. That means we don't actually have the ability to do a whole lot with this part of the fish. Even if we were to move it down, that doesn't increase the usable area at all. We're still going to be limited by what can be cut apart right in here. So I'm curious to see what Smart Cut does with that. Let's go ahead and do Smart Split, treat it as a photo, and we're going to say, okay, this is a dark garment. So immediately you can see that it split it right across there. So it's a very small cut. See, it's going to go right across the back of the white part of the body, and the fin is contoured very well. So when we get this onto a shirt, that's the only area that could potentially be noticeable, but you'll be able to focus on that easily whenever you're lining up the two transfers because this is going to be a very forgiving portion of the cut. Other than that, everything else is is completely separate artwork. So now that it's done, let's go ahead and bring this back into ProRIP and let's just see what this looks like when it's on individual transfers. We're going to click Save and click Yes. It's going to close down Smart Cut and it's going to give us the option to bring it back into ProRIP. Okay to load graphic 1. It's going to bring it in. It's going to rip it. You can see it's doing it right here on the top. As soon as that's done, it's going to ask us to bring in the second one. All right, now that it's ready to load graphic 2, click OK. It's going to bring it in. It's going to try to rip it for us real quick. And I want to draw your attention to what this looks like here. We've brought in an image that's very large. It's 12.5 by 14 inches. In fact, the only other way to print this would be on something like an iColor 800 that has a 12.5 inch wide print area. So now with your 560, you're able to cut apart a graphic that is as large as the flagship printer and put it onto just 2 transfers. It's actually going to cost the same amount that it would to print it on an iColor 800 because you're using two $2 transfer sheets to get the same results. It's just going to take you a little bit longer in processing and in transferring to get it done. But we've been very efficient with the amount of space we've used here. We've taken an 11-inch sheet and we've maximized both the height and the width of that sheet. I mean, we're at the very bottom of this, almost up the very top. Now, the other thing is we should center this before running it into production. Now, if I was going to process this image, I would definitely want to trim it. And we're going to do that right here. Remember, remove blank space. That's going to cut off the blank pixels on all sides. And we can bring that one tip of the snout up a little bit. It's going to give us a little bit more room to play with. Click that there. Now that it's trimmed, we can go ahead and we can center it. First, click the center horizontally. It's going to move it over just a hair and then center vertically. And now we're bringing that edge up just a little bit so that it's not right at the edge of the transfer sheet. Okay, we can come back over to the other side and we'll do the same thing here. We're going to first trim out the blank space, get rid of all the blank pixels. And here it's detecting that there's some bit of artwork in here. I can't tell based on this. We can change the platinum and see if we can spot it real quick. Let's go ahead and do like a cranberry look. Okay, yeah, I see just a little bit of splash in here. So that's not going to allow us to trim this area here, but we can still center it horizontally and vertically, and it's going to help a little bit. This is plenty of space right in here and plenty of space on both sides. So now you could take these 2 images, run them as transfers, put them back together on a shirt on press, and you've created a large all over graphic with just a couple of clicks. Very, very cool stuff. The last thing you're going to do whenever you've prepared a job and you've brought it in, whether or not you're using Smart Cut, is you're going to print it. To do that, first make sure all of your settings are correct, that you have the right paper selected, the right size selected, and that all of these settings here are either at default or you've changed them with specific guidance for a certain reason. Then whenever you're ready, you can go up to this area right here and click print to output your job on your printer. I don't have a printer hooked up now, but once it's done ripping, it's going to send it out to the printer and you'll be able to select your printer from the drop-down menu, click OK, and it will come out the other side.
ProRIP Essentials is constantly getting improved. Recently, they added a few new features that we'll discuss throughout the following chapters. In this first video, we'll cover the white layer generation function. You now have the ability to generate a transparent background for your 1- and 2-step transfers, even if you're working with a graphic like a JPEG or a bitmap that doesn't have a built-in alpha channel. And by alpha channel, that means the ability to have transparency built into the image. So to demonstrate this, I've gone ahead and pulled up the iColor Carnival image right here. Now this checkerboard pattern we have in the background, that shows us that there's transparency here. And if I were to draw on a layer behind it with a brush, for instance, in dark blue, we would have all of the image elements that were part of this, the confetti, the balloons, the hats, they're going to show up in front of what I'm drawing. That's because they're surrounded by a transparent area. That's perfect for white toner because all of the transparent area is not going to print white, it's not going to print color, it's not going to print anything. That makes layer creation perfectly easy. However, what if the entire background was filled with white, for instance? This happens a lot. We have an image that you download from the internet or that a client provides, and it has a solid baked-in white background. So to demonstrate that, what we're going to do is we're going to merge these 2 layers. And by merging the layers, what happens is, it doesn't matter what I do here. I add another layer that's transparent. I can take my brush and I can start drawing. You're not going to see that because everything around the graphic is now solid white, just like you would expect it to be. So we can go ahead and export this as a JPEG. So we're going to save a copy, and I'm going to go ahead and save this right here as a JPEG file so that we know there's no background removal, no alpha channel. We're going to save this as Carnival iColor letter white background, and then click Save. Now, when we go to import this image into ProRIP, let's go here to import image, and then we're going to grab that Carnival white background image right there.
So when I load it, it's going to pop up this warning here. This graphic contains no alpha channel. Please use a different method to generate the white layer. So ProRIP Essentials automatically knows that this JPEG doesn't have an alpha channel. It doesn't have a transparency layer. So there's no chance that we're going to have anything other than a solid white border. If we were to print this, the whole sheet would come out with a massive white rectangle and our image. That would not be printable at all. So we're going to click OK. We're going to let this image load. Now, instead of use transparency, using the built-in transparency of the image to dictate where we do and don't print toner, we're going to click this and we're going to say use background color. Now, this allows us to select which color we want to knock out. Now, there is a limitation of this, and we'll talk about it in just a second. But if I click this eyedropper, and then I'm going to use this target tool to just grab any area that has white on it. I'm going to click it right here. Now I've selected the background color of white. Now, there's also this threshold here. What that means is, let's say a customer provides you with a lower quality image. Obviously, we have a very high quality image that's coming from a vectorized PDF file. But if a customer gave you a slightly compressed JPEG file and you have those discolored square artifacts that come from compression, you could increase this threshold some. And you're going to be able to get colors that are ranging from white to off-white or to slightly darker. It's going to give us a little bit of a range of colors to work with. That way, it doesn't have all of those weird square compression artifacts all around the details of the image. You can give yourself a little bit of fluff room. But because we know we have a perfect PDF file we're working with, I can leave this threshold just about on the minimum, 0, 1% perfect. And then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now that I've done that, you can see there's actually some compression artifacting that's gone on here. If we zoom in a little bit, by clicking image and zoom, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is a very, very high quality JPEG, yet we still have compression artifacts. So I'm discovering this now for the first time. Let's go ahead and go back over here. We're going to uncheck our zoom tool, and we're going to come and select the eyedropper tool again. But now I'm going to up that threshold. Let's go ahead and up it to, let's say, 5. We're going to give ourselves just a little bit of wiggle room. Click OK, and let's see if that gets rid of all of it. I see it looks like it got rid of most of it, but there's still maybe a little bit left. Let's go to image, zoom. Okay, we still have just a couple of flecks there. And this is with a very high quality exported JPEG image. We still have artifacting. So we're going to go ahead and turn off the zoom tool. We're going to click the eyedropper, and we're going to go ahead and move it up to, let's say, 10. That gives us a 10% gradient that it's going to pull out. Click OK, and I see a little bit less fringing. Let's go to image, zoom. All right, there's a little bit of white fringing, and I'm not sure if this is just part of the preview that we're seeing or if it's actually taken everything out. But let's go ahead and just ramp it all the way up then. Let's go to 25. Eyedropper again. We're going to jump this up to 25, and this certainly should take out the vast majority of it. Image, zoom, and now we have a pretty clean image. I'm not seeing any salt and pepper littered around the edge. The edges look pretty clean. It looks like it grabbed most of it. Now, let's talk about the limitations of this. If you see this graphic here, it looks phenomenal. We've knocked out all of the background that was baked in, along with the compression artifacts. However, if we compare the graphic we have now with the original one in Photoshop, let me show you something very interesting here. We're going to step back in history before we merged in this white background, and I'm just going to go ahead and click right here. Now, we're showing the transparency again. This is the graphic, the way it looked when we imported it from the PDF. And you can see the checkerboard pattern showing all of the transparent areas. But down here at the bottom, take a look at that. We lost all of that solid white text as soon as we removed the matching background color. So if I were to take this paintbrush here, for instance, and just like we did before, I draw under it with this dark red, look at that. You can see that it was intended to have white text that was printed out. But over here on ProRIP, that text is now knocked out to show the underlying shirt color. So that is one of the limitations. If, for instance, a customer takes their graphic, even if it was designed in Illustrator as a vector graphic in high quality, as soon as that graphic gets flattened out and we lose the transparency channels and it's replaced with something like white or black or any solid color, any of that information that gets merged in is lost. So you have to be very careful whenever you're removing the background to not remove anything that was intended to be there.
Okay, now in terms of the interface, there's a few new features that we can talk about. The first one is you may be more interested in a dark theme. If you're working late at night and you don't want the bright background here, the way you can go about fixing that now is to go into Settings, Theme, and switch either from light to dark or from dark to light. In my case, I don't mind the light theme. But the next thing that they've added here is this tab, the Support tab. So not only can you submit a support ticket if you're running into issues, but they have this wonderful knowledge base here that links you right to the website. And there are all types of brochures and flyers and instruction manuals, not only for every single one of the UNINET printers, but all of the transfer media. So if you're working on a project and there's a technical bit of information you need to know, the number one place to get started is this knowledge base right here. The next two ways you can get help are to submit a support ticket. This is just an email that you're going to send to the support team describing whatever issue you're facing, and they'll get back with you in a reasonable amount of time. And if they do have the need to work with you directly, one of the things that they have the ability to do now is to remote support you. The way they do that is TeamViewer. So you'll install TeamViewer, they'll give you a code, they can get into your computer and they can see, are there any settings that might have been adjusted, any obvious things that are missing, and they can help you resolve that directly on your computer. It's a great addition to the software.
So good luck, and I'll see you in the next one.